Today I'll be showing you how to change the clutch in a 2010 Cobalt. Should be the same for all the years of the Cobalts. This is the 2.2 liter non-SS car. So first thing we're going to do is get it up on the lift, pull the wheels off, and begin taking some things off the top here. Engine cover, fuse panel. So let's get started. First things first, we'll disconnect the battery here. It's going to be in the trunk. $10mm. Just kind of shove the cable up over here out of the way. The hubcap is 19mm. Take that off. All right, next we're going to remove the engine cover. Journal cap back on. Then we'll take the PCM cover off. And the fuse box cover off. You have to move your coolant overflow hose out of the way to get that off. Next we're going to remove the fuse box. So these bolts right here are holding down, that one's already loose. These bolts are holding in some electrical connectors from the underneath side. So what you want to do is loosen them up all the way, and then you'll be able to push on them. And that'll pop the clip out of the bottom of this housing here. And then you'll be able to lift up on these tabs right here on the side. So you get a screwdriver underneath that one. There should be one on all four corners. This one might be on the back side. But that's how you remove the positive cable there. That's how we'll get this disconnected from all the connectors underneath. You can see these big harnesses that are going in there from all different angles. Those are part of clips, like I said. So we'll get on these with a 7mm, I believe. So you get them backed out and then push down on them. I don't know why this one's not going. I'll have to get a look underneath. So go ahead and do that for all 5 of these bolts. 10mm, we'll disconnect this. And we can start getting some screwdrivers underneath here that pry out the plastic tabs, and you see it start to lift up there. Just work your way around the sides. loose on the front. Probably have to put the phone down to get the ones on the back. They're a little bit hard to see. I'll get a flashlight so I can show you. There's one on the back side. And the other one, I'm not sure if there even is 4. Might just be 3. So we'll try this one and see if it comes up. It looks like after the 3rd one it lifts up out of there. Now you can kind of see what I was talking about. These clips here, they get pushed down off of the bottom of this. That one's still hanging on, so I need to unscrew this a little further. And then you push on it. See that disengage there. Maybe go a little bit further. Well, oh goodness, you see the bolt sticking down here. So once you get all of those plugs, got 2 more to go, and I'm going to have to use both hands here. This is really stiff for some reason. Once you get all 5 of those clips out, then you can take this box off the top after you unplug this corner harness. I'll have to get a little screwdriver to put in there. All right, this one on the corner, you got to push down in this direction on this tab to get it to compress enough to pull up out of there. And you should be able to pick your fuse box up, set it to the side. If you want to take a picture or note where these are, you know, they can basically only fit in one location because of their size, but we're going to start moving a lot of these electrical wires and connectors out of the way so that we can get this bracket out of here. So we'll go ahead and disconnect the PCM main plugs here. Sometimes they can be a little tricky. So they're 2 different colors, and they're color coordinated for the plugs. The gray is on the bottom, the black is on the top. You can remove that. The reason I did that next is because this wiring harness for this plug is laying over the top of these 2. To get them out of the way, you can just kind of fold them up underneath some of these other hoses and stuff just to hold them. It's not wanting to pop out. And you can see there's these little plastic like Christmas tree clips on the bottom that go in here, so I'll get underneath there with a small screwdriver and pop that one out. There's usually, I think, probably a 10mm nut right here, so that needs to come off. And then we'll have to find these 2 13s down here, and there may be another one that holds this bracket on, but I'll loosen the 13s next and we'll see. So I just took like a trim tool and got underneath there and popped that one out. Shove it up out of the way as well. And get the 13s down here on the bottom. Sorry, bad camera view on the first one. to look around just a little bit, see if there's a wire harness clip maybe holding something down. That one's not stuck in where it's supposed to be. But it feels pretty loose. Oh, there we go. Just need to wiggle at an angle. Move that box out of the way so we can get access to the top of the transmission mount and the slave cylinder line, the shift linkage, all this stuff, upper bell housing bolts. One of the next steps here is to install this engine support that holds it up while you take the cradle out from underneath, or the subframe, whatever you want to call it, that the transmission's bolted to and everything. So you got to hold the engine up. In order to get to both of the engine lifting hooks, one's underneath the air cleaner here, so we'll go ahead and take off PCV hose clamp and take loose everything. Clamp here, and there's another one right down in here, and then we got a small plastic trim clip right there to be able to pull that off. Just want to get underneath that, pull that one out, and that'll lift up. 8mm on the 2 clamps. Need kind of a extension to get the one down below here. Like this hose is hanging on. Might have to get a little pick or something down inside of there. Or I could loosen the other clamp and see if it'll come off of the intake. But it's pretty stuck at the moment. I think because of the way my engine support is going to be pulling at this at somewhat of an angle, I'm going to go ahead and remove the mass airflow sensor and air cleaner lid. That way I don't damage anything when my chain is running across there. Next, we're going to pull the clip out of the hydraulic line going to the slave cylinder. And then we will disconnect this line, stick a little rubber glove finger over the end of it, and throw a zip tie on there like this, just to keep it from dripping everywhere. You're going to lose a little bit of fluid out of there when you disconnect that. You can just kind of put this up out of the way somewhere. Remove your transmission mount bolts. These are 16mm. They're all the same length. Some guys will remove a bunch more of these retainers and wire harness clips and things over here on the side of the engine purge valve, and back up here on the firewall, so that you can remove this, not remove, but pull back this main harness all the way out of the way. But so mine's going to be a little more cluttery in the film than potentially if I moved all that stuff out of the way, but I'm trying to do it in the least amount of time here. Next, I'm going to remove this retainer clip on the stud right here for the wire harness. Get a different tool. Okay, to get this started, I used a flat blade screwdriver and turned it sideways like this. Now that the width is more than the width of the flat blade screwdriver, I'm just going to try and use both hands and kind of work it off of there. It's one of the transmission mount studs, so it's a big bolt. Get that off there so you can get to the stud to remove it. Careful with these wire harness plastic protecting wraps. They're very brittle and they're going to crack and break on you. Next, you want to remove the shift linkage. So what I did was put a wrench in here. Hard to do with one hand. Put a wrench in here and then put the pry bar on top of it and pop that shift linkage off. All right, for the lower one, which you can see basically right behind the tip of my screwdriver, underneath there, I got in here with a flat blade screwdriver and got underneath it and popped this one up. So the upper one's kind of in the way of the view here, but got underneath here and pried up to get the second one loose. Next, if you follow the shift cables back, there's a bracket. You can see there's an external torque bolt there to be able to disconnect the shift bracket from the transmission. I believe that's at E12. So I'm just on that with a 3/8 drive ratchet with about a 6-inch extension. Now your shifter cables in the bracket should be loose. You can push them up out of the way. Sorry for the not good lighting here, but so this bracket here is loose now. You can kind of push it up behind some of these brake lines. That'll hold it away from the transmission. Okay, next up, we got some wire harness connectors you need to disconnect from the transmission and around. So you got, I believe that's a speed sensor right there. You got oxygen sensor right there. On the back side of the thermostat, you're going to have a coolant temp sensor and potentially another oxygen sensor back there. We've got another clip down here. So the goal is to get this wiring harness disconnected. The same one that you pulled the clip off of the stud. And that's just so you can get that entire harness pulled underneath this radiator hose and back out of the way. So you can drop the transmission without having anything connected to it, and the wire harness won't be in your way when you try and put the transmission back up to the engine. So several of these I'm not going to be able to get a good camera recording on because my hand is going to block the video of the actual connection. So a bunch of them have little retainer clips like that gray one right there that are holding them into different places. So just make sure you note where those are. Take a picture if you need to, so you know where they go back together. So once you got that bundle of, I don't know, there's 5 or 6 clips loose, and you can see it's this harness here that you disconnected from that stud, and you need to pull it up underneath the radiator hose, which is, you need to take your time so you don't tear up the protective wrap on it. You're gonna have to probably kind of shove it through from the back side and then maybe pull a little bit. The electrical clips and plugs, retainers are all gonna get hung up on things. You just wanna take your time. Apologize for the video, not very good on the detail, but it's a tight space. And once you get all that through, you can kind of just fold it up here behind, towards the radiator. Get it out of your way. Next, we can disconnect this ground right here. It's going to be on a stud. I think it's a 13 millimeter. And then we'll move up to bell housing bolts. So there's one right on top there that we took the retainer off of. And then I don't see another one on top. We might be moving down underneath after that. So it looks like that ground strap bolt is a 12 millimeter. And again, I'm on it with a 6-inch extension on a 3/8 drive ratchet. So remove that bolt and just kind of pull that ground strap right here out of the way. All right, upper bell housing bolt, 18 millimeter. Kind of on it right through that gap there. And I have a 3-inch extension with a 1/2-inch drive ratchet. You have to go underneath the coolant hoses with your socket to get this one out. Next, we're going to raise the car up. We want to get some of these plastic covers off so we can access the crank pulley. We're going to need to turn that in order to get to the flywheel bolts. And then on the other side, well, both of them, the kind of plastic shields are blocking this cradle frame from coming down. So we got a bunch of plastic clips and 7 millimeter fasteners to remove. A lot of times these will break as you're removing them, so you might want to have some spares. There's one more up here. Up inside of there, there's one more. It's a 10mm fastener, looks like. It hangs this plastic. Just kind of let the rest of that hang. Remove this cover. Gonna have the same kind of fasteners on the other side. Maybe some 7mm. And then some push pin clips. That one's gonna break, looks like. This one, the head is ground off of from dragging something, maybe. Maybe one more 7mm. There we go. That lets it kind of fold out of the way. And then you're going to see one more push type fastener up here. Same as on the other side, except it's not a 10mm bolt. That's what's holding this in. That was a little aggressive. Get that cover out of the way. Now you can access these bolts and get up underneath here. Our next step is going to be to support the radiator with a bungee strap or ratchet strap or something, because this subframe that we're getting ready to remove is what actually holds the radiator up, these rubber bushings. So I just stuck a tie strap into the frame here and looped the strap underneath the radiator and condenser, and then hooked it up along the front grill support. It's a metal frame, so then just kind of snug it up so that the weight is off of this. You can see that the bushings are pushed up out of the hole here. Sorry. So I've got the weight of the radiator suspended, that way we can drop that frame. Next we can pop these axles out. And use a hammer to tap that in. Depending on the level of your transmission, when you pull that axle, you might get some fluid dripping. So I just want to put a pan down there to catch that. On the driver's side, I go in from the rear direction and just pry against the case right there with a pry bar and get that one out. It's loose, and we're going to get some fluid from that side too. Next, we're going to remove this heat shield. So I think it's a 15 millimeter right here on the side of the block. And then there's a small fastener up in here, 10 millimeter feels like. So we'll remove that heat shield. Some of these cars have a ball joint that's removable, so there'll be bolts and nuts here. These are riveted together, so we're not going to get that lucky. I could either separate the ball joint here, or I can remove the control arm here. And since we've got to pull the cradle bolts anyway, I think I'm just going to remove these bolts. These are 15s. This is a 21, and then I don't have to separate the ball joint. We'll see. I don't know if the control arm will be in the way for other stuff or not, but I know I'm going to need to pull the axle out, and in order to do that, you got to have the knuckle kind of free away from the control arm. So it's either ball joint or connection to the frame, and I'm going to start with connection to the frame. So we'll do that on both sides. Just getting on these with a 15 millimeter and extension with the impact. Should be able to reach all of these that way. These bolts have a small steel retainer cup on them. Just remove that at the same time. 3 15s on the bottom of this mount in the back. Next, you got an 18 millimeter right up there, and then one on the upper side of this. It's for the power steering rack. You can see where the bolts come through the bottom. Just follow that to the top side, but we're gonna disconnect the rack from the frame. Passenger side, I can get a 1/2-inch drive ratchet in there. And then if you want to speed it up, you can throw an air ratchet on top of it to get it the rest of the way loose. Driver side, switch from a deep well to a short, and you can reach in there. Same thing, switch steering air ratchet. You want to speed this up. May not actually have enough clearance to get the bolt out, but all you got to do is kind of move the rack over, just so that it's not falling back in that threaded hole when you try to drop the cradle here. And we're just going to bungee strap the steering rack up to the exhaust here. This side you can get the bolt all the way out. Next, we lower the car down a little bit so the transmission jack is going to be able to reach it most likely. But we're going to support this mount bracket here so we can remove this 18 millimeter through bolt. Kind of trapped myself there. Might have to go back in just a little bit. And we can get it out. Move that one. Can lower this back down. And you switch this jack to supporting the cradle on the front end here. Then we can begin removing our 21 millimeter cradle bolts on the 4 corners there. Oh, I forgot one thing before you take those 21 millimeters out. You can either disconnect the sway bar links here, or you can disconnect the sway bar brackets from the cradle, or you can disconnect it up here. It doesn't matter which one. I think I'm probably going to go with the bracket on the cradle. Looks like about a 15 millimeter in there. Should just be one on each side. One bolt on the front side of this driver's side. And one bolt on the front side of the passenger side. I believe that's all that holds it. So the passenger side, I'm going to get on with a 15 millimeter wrench. And I can either switch to a ratcheting wrench, or I can probably get my air ratchet in there from the top like this with an extension. Looks like just a ratchet with a deep well 15 is gonna be the right size over here. And I'll switch to the air ratchet. Start with the 21s. With all four of those out, we should be able to pry our control arms out of there. Probably pull those out as we start to drop the cradle down. I must not have had my chains tight enough on the engine support from up above, because the unit started to sag a little bit too low and it was getting bound right here on this front mount. So I went ahead and supported the transmission with the jack stand, and then I'm just going to slowly try to pull the control arms out of this cradle and lower the transmission jack, maybe with my foot or something, because it's gonna be a little bit of a chore to get it down with one person. I definitely won't get this part on video, because if I did, I might be on bloopers or something. But next step is to go ahead and pull the control arms out. Should be enough play in there now. Both sides, we'll wiggle those out, and then this frame will be free to come down, so we'll have to slowly lower it with the transmission jack, or it might just fall on the floor, I don't know. Next, we're going to 16 millimeter remove these 3 bracket bolts. Remove that. Next, we'll take out the starter, 15 millimeter right here, and there's a ground strap underneath this bolt. It's pretty long-winded. Should have used an air ratchet. pull that harness down to the side. There's a connector on the starter plug up here. You gotta push up a little tab and pull back. And there's probably a 10 or 12 millimeter nut on the back of that. It turns out that one's 13 millimeter. Two different wires here, one from the top, part of a larger harness, and then a smaller one. Now we're going to need to get to that other starter bolt. Try to get a light. Alright, the other bolt, you can see it up there on the left. It's going to be a 15. Can reach this one, 3/8 drive ratchet. I have a deep well, probably wouldn't need to be, and about a 6-inch extension. Once you get that out, then the starter should come off. Loose now, just need to get that bolt the rest of the way out. That out. Next you want to get a jack in place, and looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts. That's all I can see at the moment. So we're going to take those 5 out. Looks like they're 18s, and see if we can't separate the transmission. We got to get the jack up there and support it obviously first. Oh, one more comment. I made a mistake earlier. I said we need to remove the starter to get to the flywheel bolts, but this is not an automatic transmission, obviously, because we're doing a clutch. So you just need to remove the starter to get to this bolt. We'll be taking the clutch and the flywheel off from the other side. So we'll be breaking everything free with a 1/2-inch ratchet as long as I can reach them. And then we just use a 3/8 drive air ratchet to get them out the rest of the way. That one's gonna take something else, probably a deep well socket, maybe even a 3/8 drive ratchet to get up in there. I did it again. Trap myself in there where I can't get the ratchet out because there's not enough room. So take the extension off to get those 2 out. Got one more up there on the left. I'm going to make sure I got the transmission secured to the jack before I take that last one out. Something you want to be cautious of whenever you're taking that transmission out and kind of moving things around, that your air conditioning pulley doesn't smash against your frame there. So I put a small block of wood in between the compressor body and the frame so it couldn't impact. I've got the transmission pulled. Got some rust here on the input shaft. We're going to be replacing the slave cylinder as well as the entire clutch kit. So spring plate, clutch disc, and I did get a new flywheel as well. The only thing that did not show up on time is the flywheel bolts, so I might be parking this for a couple of days until they show up. Do the spring plate bolts next. Clutch is definitely smoked. You can see the plates are separated. That one is burnt all the way through. I'm going to use an impact and 17mm to pull out the flywheel bolts. I am going to hold with a 21mm the crankshaft pulley on the other end, just so nothing moves. With an impact, most likely nothing will move, and I could probably just put my hand on the flywheel, but better to be safe than sorry. I am replacing the flywheel. Got all new components over here, like I said, except for the bolts. So gonna have at least a 1-day pause. Today's Sunday for me, and they say that the bolts won't be here till Monday evening. But we will go ahead and switch out the slave cylinder and pull the flywheel off and get ready for when the bolts get here. You can see those bolts got some Loctite on them from the factory. Might have to tap that a little bit to get it off. So I'm gonna put the phone down. Got 4 bolts for the slave cylinder. These are T27 Torx. Probably be better with a 1/4-inch drive socket, but my 3/8 is working. It's just bumping up against the slave cylinder. Didn't have any indication that the slave cylinder failed, but I never replace the clutch and go this far, pull the transmission out, and leave the old slave cylinder in for a $20 or $30 part. Looks like a little bit of uneven on a seal there too. So yeah, it does need replaced, but even if it didn't, I would replace it every time. I did buy the Luck rep set kit. It was just the same price basically as any of the rest of the kits, but I've used them in the past and they're good brand, so going with it this time too. Cleaned off the surface there around the shaft where the seal seats up against. So I noticed there was some transmission fluid down in the bottom there. I dried it up, but if you look at the way this slave cylinder is, it's got a shaft seal in the center and then a housing seal around the outside. So it should be fine to install this, even if there was a little fluid. There's not actually an input shaft seal other than what's on the slave. Go ahead and put those T30s back in. So I said it wrong earlier, I said T27, but these are actually T30 fasteners. These bolts get torqued to 89 inch-pounds. Get them all snug down first. Sorry, bad camera angle. It's hard to hold the transmission still so it doesn't fall off of my jack. I just have some chains kind of lightly tightened on it. And give it the torque wrench and take a video. All right, got all 4 of those torqued down. All right, the good old US Post Office finally got our bolts here. So we're gonna get the flywheel installed. These get torqued to 39 foot-pounds plus 25 degrees. So if you have a special torque wrench that'll give you the degrees, if not, you can just kind of guesstimate there. Pretty close to half of 45. start snugging these up. And we'll go opposite, just like you would a lug nut. So I'm using a flywheel wrench. It sticks in the teeth of the flywheel, and you can hold down on it while you hold the torque wrench in the other hand and tighten it up. So I'll try to do this with the phone in hand. So 39 foot-pounds on all 6 of those, and then we're going to go an additional 25 degrees. So I won't get that part on camera, but basically, let's say you start here, instead of going 45, you're going to start here and go half of 45. All right, next we're going to put the clutch plate up there. Get your alignment tool. Slide it in the middle. If you're using 2 hands, you can do this in 2 separate steps, but get your pin stuck in there, and the clutch, the clutch only goes on one way. It's nice and smooth here. If you had it flipped around the other way, the structure kind of protrudes out a little bit, and it would be rubbing on the flywheel structure. So you know it's in there right if your pad is friction against the flywheel. Next, the spring plate goes on. I'm gonna have a couple of bolts in my fingers and put this up with 2 hands, so I won't get this part on video, but only because it's a little bit heavy and awkward, I'm gonna use 2 hands. And when you go to start tightening these bolts down, you wanna do it very evenly. You don't want any pressure to be uneven as the spring plate goes on to the clutch plate. So once you kind of get them all snug together, then you can use your ratchet and kind of count the number of turns on each one. Going across pattern, you know, opposite, just like we did on the flywheel and every other automotive application where you're trying to tighten things evenly with distributed load. So the spring plate bolt sequence will be like this: 1, skip 1, 2, skip 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and these get torqued to 22 foot-pounds. Clutch kit comes with a little pack of spline grease, so you want to make sure you lubricate these splines before going back in. Sometimes your alignment's not perfect, and any little bit of lubrication you can get will help. Sometimes also you get people that put a little bit of grease on the fingers of that pressure plate, which would be the surface of where this slave cylinder is going to impact. And pull your alignment pin out, and then put just a little bit on there. Next step is to get the transmission back in the car. So that is going to be a chore with one person. Sometimes it's a lot easier with a second person to help kind of hold things while you push and get it aligned, but I'm going to take a quick break here and go try to put that back in the car. Once you get the unit back lined up and bolts in, then you can torque these to 55 foot-pounds. Next, you can come back up top and raise up the engine transmission side until you can get these bolts put back in. So looks like we need to scoot a little bit to the rear at the same time. But when you get these mount bolts in, you can still leave this hooked up or you can take it out. But I'll probably leave it hooked up for now. And then we'll go begin putting everything else back together to get the cradle back up underneath it. But we're going to get it in position first and at the right height with this transmission mount. All right, got our 3 mount bolts back installed. Now we'll move back down underneath and get the cradle going. Since I'm doing this part by myself and I did the control arm separation rather than the ball joint separation, it's going to be a little tricky to get these back in the slot at the same time that I'm raising this up. So I'm using a transmission jack on the back side and just a jack stand on the front side for that cradle. And I won't be getting this on video because I'll be doing a lot of maneuvering and pushing and pulling with both hands. But essentially I'm going to go up a little bit in the back until I can get the control arms kind of lined up with the slot and try to push them in. And then I'm going to start the bolt through there to hold the control arm in place until I can get the back up. Then I'll start trying to get the sway bar back in position and we'll kind of go from there. Got high enough to have the control arms kind of started. So what I was going to do is go ahead and try and throw a bolt or two in here just to keep them lined up. Sorry for the shaky camera. If I can get the control arms kind of lined up, I need to take this axle down, CV axle, spin it back underneath here towards the transmission. Actually, I can go ahead and insert it also. Same with the other side. Get this control arm started up in here with a bolt and then put the axle in. And we can kind of go up the rest of the way. Got the sway bar halfway sitting in the right spot. There's a little seat right here you can see. Once the cradle goes up a little further, I'll be able to get it kind of right into the correct position. For the sway bar link, or for the sway bar, you got these metal caps that go down into a slot and then roll over onto the sway bar. Might take a little bit of leverage to get it back into position. That's going to be a 15 millimeter. And as you go down, you can kind of tap it backwards to get it seated against the back of that a little bit better. And that's falling into place just fine. Probably have to get a longer socket or move my air ratchet though to tighten that down. Next, I'm going to tap this in with a hammer and get this bolt in there. Go ahead and get that sway bar tightened down. I did get that bolt started and lined up, so we can just go right up into the hole there. We've got our power steering, one of the bolts, not power steering, steering rack. One of the bolts is close to the hole. You can see we got to go a little bit forward there, so it just helps us get things lined up. Not going to put these in yet. Oh, backside bolt fell out. Throw that one back in and get ready to go up. And that hole also needs to go forward, you can see. Got our axles plugged back in, both sides. They're not all the way in yet, they're just kind of lined up. Next, we can also get that mount back up in here. Those 3 bolts, and it wraps around and goes to those 3 long ones that come down all the way through the cradle there. One other thing to watch as you're going back up is that front kind of roll mount. Make sure that it's lined up. So we'll go ahead and raise that cradle up and get the 4 bolts put in. Before I start tightening up all these 21 millimeters, I'm going to put this mount bracket, attach that back. So I'll have to lift up a little bit on the engine probably, and get that hole lined up. Actually, I'll put it like a dowel pin on the backside and pull it straight, and then start the bolt from this side. And so I got this bolt started just to hold it there, and that way I didn't have to keep the front of this cradle supported with the jack. And I moved the jack underneath that mount just so I could get this in the right orientation to be able to insert this bolt. So we'll get that tightened up, and then we'll snug up all the cradle bolts. We still have to go up here and get the that steering rack bolt right there tightened down. And the other one on the other side is not tightened either. Back here, I can still see a gap right there in between the steering rack and the cradle. So get the cradle snugged up, and then steering rack down, and then I'm going to move on to that bracket that goes on these 3 bolts of the transmission and loops over the top of the steering rack. Finished running up these 21s. The 4th one, I have to put a couple of locking nuts on the back of it because the factory body encased nut broke, so I won't be getting that one on camera. I'm going to back it with a 22 millimeter wrench because that's what size the nuts are, and tighten that up. So a quick recap before we move on. We've got all 4 cradle bolts tightened up. I ran them up with an impact. I didn't do torque specs. You got to make sure that your radiator is seated in your cradle there. Ran the forward mount bolt in, tightened up the steering rack bolts, 1 on each side. Tightened up the sway bar bolts. Those are 15 millimeter. 1 right there and 1 on the other side. Now we're getting ready to push the axles the rest of the way in, and then we can install our control arm bolts here. And I'm also going to put this bracket in. Hopefully I didn't restrict the space by installing the rest of this stuff already, but I'm going to put that bracket in and run the 3 long bolts through the bottom of the cradle. I did have to pull the axle back out just by pushing on the steering knuckle and move it down just a little bit to be able to fit this bracket back up in and over there. And then fold that shield back up to where this 15 millimeter will go into the block. You gotta tighten down these 3 15s, and then you got those 3 15s at the bottom. You do have to kind of make sure that your shift cables are routed in the correct spot by that heat shield, because this bracket, sorry for the light, this bracket wants to bump into them. So if you want to kind of dislodge your shift cables from where they were stowed up here out of the way and kind of push them back towards the transmission, and you can see where they're going to actually sit, and make sure that they're not rubbing on anything around that bracket. I said that wrong too. These bolts here are going to be 16s, not 15s. That one's binding up a little bit. Finish that one off with a ratchet. Ones down here on the bottom are 15s, and then also that one on the block is a 15. Tighten that one down. Go ahead and put these control arm bolts back in. Make sure your axle is pushed in all the way. I'm going to do it with one hand. It's no good camera angle. Just trying to tighten everything up so we can finish pushing the axle in. Next, we're going to put the starter back in. I'm going to have to use two hands to do that, but probably get that top bolt started first. I'm going to have to put a, I think, 15mm on the back of it with an extension to try and start it. I went ahead and got it seated and ran this one down just finger tight. Now I'm going to use a short 15 on a 6-inch extension, or yeah, about 6, might be an 8, I don't know, to try and get on that top bolt. And then I'm going to stick my air ratchet up there and run that one down. So I forgot on this lower starter bolt. But there's a ground strap that needs to go underneath it. And that's on the same harness as the power wire for the starter. So that was my next step. To put the power wire up here on the stud, and I noticed that I didn't have the ground wire attached. So I want to put this one on first, the small one, and then the orientation of this one seems like I got the harness maybe a little bit twisted or something, because I know it needs to be facing down, but the way that this wire is trying to twist, it's not cooperating. So that's a 13mm, we'll tighten that one up, and then I'll put our electrical plug in here, and the starter will be back in. Next, we're going to reinstall these plastic guards, all the 7mm fasteners and push clips. I'm not going to go through that process again, you can just look at the beginning of the video. So moving back to the top, we've got the 10mm, is it 10 or 11, I can't remember. I've got this bolt here with a ground strap. Reattach that. We put back in the stud transmission bell housing bolt on the top and put the wire harness retainer back on, and then ran this harness underneath the coolant hose and got it all stretched back here. And then we're going to plug in all of our connections for the oxygen sensors, temp sensors, and all that, speed sensor and whatnot. Then we'll move on to the shift cable. So that bracket there is going to have to go back on the dowel. Back in focus. Big sunshine glare over there, so I might have to block the window. Right there is a rubber dowel, and that's where the bottom right there of the shift bracket will set on that, and then we'll throw the bolt in right up there behind that wire harness. So we're going to tuck the wire harness down and make sure there's no interference there. Part of it goes underneath and part of it goes above. I'll show you that once I get the shift cable back installed. All right, there's a shift cable bracket. You can see one wire harness goes underneath, comes out the back, those colored wires. The protective sleeve is disintegrating off of there. And then the bolt we'll throw in right there underneath the wire harness that goes over it. So right there, that harness goes up to these higher connectors. One oxygen sensor right there, and then I think that's a temp sensor. Again, that is a E12, I think, reverse Torx socket to tighten that down. Next, you can put your shift cables back on. Snap those into place with some pressure. Not going to be able to see that lower one very well at all, but same process. Just snap it in place by pushing on it. So those two. Next, we should be able to reinstall our hydraulic line here. So we'll pull that plug out of the new slave cylinder, slip off the glove and zip tie we had on here to hold the fluid, and then plug that in. It's just a snap clip. There's a new clip in the new slave cylinder, so you don't have to install one. It's already in there. And then here's the bleed valve. I'm going to be hooking up a vacuum line and pulling a vacuum on this fitting right here on the bleed valve, and then adding fluid to the master cylinder right up there to do the bleed on the slave cylinder. All right, so we got our vacuum gun hooked up to a canister to pull fluid into, and then hooked up to the bleed valve there. So the way this works is you crack open the bleed valve and then pull vacuum, or you can pull vacuum first. Crack open the bleed valve and pull fluid until there's no air coming out. This bleed valve happens to be 9mm. Sorry, I had to hold the valve because it's plastic and I was worried about breaking it. Start to get a little fluid flow in there, and you close it off, cap off your reservoir, top it off, make sure that you've got fluid in the reservoir. Pull another vacuum, open it up again. In the process of bleeding this slave cylinder, you also want to go inside the car and push the clutch pedal several times just to make sure that back in here you got the clutch master cylinder, and that'll get some air in it if the fluid has drained out of this line that you've had open for the last couple hours or whatever. in my case a day. So you want to push the pedal to make sure that you're pumping fluid from the master cylinder into the clutch master cylinder, because it's a shared system with the brake master cylinder. A couple of studs sticking up off of the frame. Well, one's off of the overflow bottle, but the other one's down here off the frame. And then you've got your two 13 millimeters. They go right here on the front side of that bracket. Before you completely tighten everything up, make sure that you can still get to all of your electrical harnesses and plugs that will sit down in your fuse box on the underneath side here. Make sure that you can get all those back in to position. Looks like I can access everything here. Well, I got one more on the bottom side there. Let's see if I can get it up. Then you've got your two TCM, PCM type connectors here. You can reach those. Clip those down in a minute, just making sure we can get to everything. And we've got our two wires that'll go on that stud or the fuse box right there. So I believe we've got access to everything. So we can go ahead and tighten down those 13s and clip all these plugs into place. Bring those down. Got it all clipped in place, then tighten these down. Just snug. Got a little wire retainer here that clips in to that fuse box bracket. And then you get your two wires up here. And then we've got that long nut to screw down on top of those. That's a 10 millimeter to tighten that one down. Keep that 10 millimeter because you're going to go to the trunk and plug the battery back in here shortly. So we put the fuse box lid back on, stick our computer in and plug it in. Just clip that one in place. A lot of times there's a little red cap that goes over here, but this car doesn't have one. Oh, forgot one plug in there. Can't forget this one in the back corner there. And it routes through that location in the corner, so your fuse box lid still fits over the top of it. There we go. You can put your overflow tank pipe back in. Slide your PCM in. Get your color coded connectors going here. So the gray one's on bottom. Put that one in first. Lock in the red tab. Slide your cover back over it. Put the air filter box lid back on. Mass airflow sensor back in. Put your air breather assembly, so the PCV hose right there, the clamp underneath, and the clamp on this side all at once. I'm just gonna use both hands and probably won't get this on video, but you know how it goes. With this little push clip to reinstall, and then you tighten down both clamps, move these clamps back, and then we just put the engine cover on. And we're ready to check the fluid level and get this thing going. Your spring tension type clamps, you want to get them back pretty much exactly like they were, so they don't leak, because they've got indentions in the hoses. Put this cover back on, pop it down onto the two little retainer clips that it has that hold it down. One in the back over here, and one in the front down here by the oil dipstick. And you should be in business. You go to the trunk and reconnect the battery. It's not nearly that difficult with two hands. To check the fluid level, you're gonna remove this plug right here. That's I think maybe like T55. I'll figure out real quick. Torx for that drain or that fill plug. There's a drain plug on the bottom the same size, but that's the fill plug. So since the car is level on the lift here, I should just be able to pull that plug. If any fluid runs out, it means we're at the right level. If it doesn't, I need to fill it until fluid begins to run out. All right, so it's actually a T50. We've got a little fluid running out, so we're still good. Put your wheels back on. Stick the hubcap back on, and that should complete the job. If you liked today's video, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.